And the Bible. So, Coffee and the Bible is a casual conversation about God where we just talk about the whole Bible, start to finish, more on a casual conversation level. If you want something deeper, just let us know. You can always let us know in the live chat, the comment section, or hit the red join button right there. And we can go ahead and set up a live video where you can participate in, like a Zoom call type thing, where we can all talk and chat about something a lot deeper if you would like. If you want to join our conversations today, where you can let us know in the live chat, and I will send you a link and you can participate. We're talking about today, this week, of course, is Holy Week, or some people would call it Passion Week. So this week we're going to talk about the events that led up. And a lot of times churches don't go over all of these events. So we're going to look at what happened Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all the way to Resurrection Sunday. And it'll be sort of a low-keyed conversation. We'll read some of the scripture. Sometimes we're just talking about it. So go ahead and grab your Bibles and a notebook, and we'll see you back in a few minutes. So that ticking is really loud back. I don't know if you hear it, but I hear it.
I don't on my end, but very rarely have I heard it.
Yeah. Now, are you on, like, I think last time we nailed it because we're both on, are you on Google or Brave?
Chrome.
Chrome? Okay.
Yeah.
So I thought that was going to fix it because last time when we both ended up on Chrome, it wasn't doing it. And then I thought sometimes it's mine. But I took off, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. If anybody's listening that knows how to fix this, let me know. So anyway, we'll just go ahead and go. It's just really loud in my ear. All right, so today we're talking about the Passion Week or the Holy Week, all the events that occurred. So I don't have a lot of extra visuals today. I did actually find an animation of the Passion Week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's really nice, but I didn't actually download it to put it in here for today. So we're just going to go through. Of course, we have Palm Sunday was last week. That celebrates when Jesus comes into Jerusalem. And of course, the prophecy, of course, is that he'd be riding on, from Zechariah, that he'd be riding on a donkey, and that's what he does. And they put the palm branches down to yell Hosanna, Hosanna, to have him be king. But in that last week, even though we celebrate it as Palm Sunday, in the course of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday through Resurrection Sunday, this happened on Monday. So Palm Sunday is what we celebrate, but the day it actually occurred would have been Monday. I don't guess that makes a difference, but I'm going to read from John's account in chapter 12, verse 12 through 19. It says, the next day, the huge crowd that had come up for the feast. Now, on what had happened, remember that Jesus, on which would have been Sunday, actually was in the house with Lazarus and Mary and Martha, and that's when they anoint his feet, remember? And Martha's the busybody, like, oh, I can't believe Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus and stuff. That occurred on Sunday, and then it continues. So that's going on in Bethany on Sunday, and then on Saturday, it says the next day, which for Monday, so Monday of Holy Week, the next day, the huge crowd that had come up for the feast heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel. Finding a young donkey, Jesus sat on it, as it was written, fear not, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt. His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things were written about him, and that the crowd had done these things for him. So you have that's the story from John. And again, they thought he was going to be king of Israel, that they were going to make him the prophecy, the Messiah. And even the Jews today, the non-believing Jews, uh, every time they meet on Sabbath, on the Saturday, the main thing that they pray for is the coming of the Messiah. All they pray for is the coming of the Messiah. And it's sad, right? Because Messiah already came.
That's true.
When I was in seminary, go ahead.
They may not even recognize when he comes back.
They might not recognize when he comes back. Although I think,
I think everybody will recognize, because.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're going to recognize him when he comes back this next time. But the thing is, they missed him the first time. And, when I was in Bible college, we had to go to they gave us a list of, they wanted us to go to all these different services we never would have gone to evaluate worship within the Southern Baptists with, these things. And one of the things that we had to do was a Jewish service.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. I think my doorbell rang. Just 1 minute. Nobody.
So you're hearing things.
See, all this ticking in my ear. Now I'm hearing bells go off in my ear.
Ticking might be what you're saying, echoing and bouncing around.
Maybe it's too loud.
I was being sarcastic.
Oh.
Like in your head.
Oh, maybe.
Bouncing around.
No, it's something to do with, I don't know. It was really soft, and then the moment we went live, it got really loud. So I don't know. I'll figure it out. I unplugged all the extra stuff into the tower. I thought that was it, but no.
Why would going live make it louder?
I don't know. Don't know. Last week when we both got on Chrome, it stopped. So I don't know.
I started out on Brave, though.
Yeah, remember though, but when it was Brave, that's when it was doing it.
Maybe that's what I need to do.
Oh, I moved my mic cable. I think my mic cable might be bad.
Maybe.
I took my mic cable and I moved it, and it stopped. Well, all this time I've gone from a condenser mic to a performance mic, and I unplugged all my extra stuff that give me, extended USBs. I unplugged everything, and it's been my cable all along.
That's why your mic on your webcam didn't have any ticking.
Oh, yeah, that's why that didn't. But see, then it sounded very echoey on the playback. All right. So that's, at least we figured it out. I don't know why I grabbed it, but I'm like wiggling everything, and so I wiggled it. All right, but you can still hear me?
Yeah.
All right, okay. So I forget what we were talking about, but on Monday, that's the events of Monday. So Sunday, Jesus was in Bethany with Lazarus and Mary and Martha, and that's when his feet were anointed. And they're like, Judas is there, like, I can't believe you're spending this perfume that would cost a whole year's wage on Jesus. We could sell it, wink, wink, and a nod. But these were perfumes that you anoint somebody that was getting ready to die. So like Jesus is there, like, no, you let her do it, And this is Sunday. Monday, then, we just read, he goes in, they want to hail him as king. Now, let's talk a minute about Judas, because, we know that Satan entered him and he killed himself, and he had remorse, but he didn't repent. And I know this is all something that's going to happen on Friday, but then Peter, he also denies Jesus, and he has remorse, but he also repents. So there's a difference between feeling bad about doing something wrong and making recompense, right?
Yeah. Judas, if he would have thought about it a little bit, he never would have done what he did.
Yeah, right. And I think that's the remorse. The fact that he had remorse, and I know he kills himself with that remorse, but the fact that he felt really bad about doing that really meant he second thought. He really he
He
felt
knew
really
he
bad
messed
that he
up.
made that choice. Yeah, yeah. But then that leads into what was his frame of mind, and I think it goes back to the triumphal entry. I think Judas felt like Jesus, and as I think all the apostles, because really it says right here, in verse 16, it says, his disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered these things that were written. So they didn't really understand. I mean, yes, Peter just said like a little while prior to that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. But I think that they all thought really at this time the Messiah was going to be a physical king in Israel. And in time, the other disciples realize that he's actually more than that, because you have John and James and Peter going up on the Mount of Transfiguration, and they see Jesus turning into the glorified Jesus, and they see Elijah and they see Moses. And so I think that little by little, they were all realizing that he's more than just that. But on the triumphal entry, Judas really thought that they were going to make him king, and he was the head of the money, right? So maybe he's thinking that I'm going to be the treasurer of the whole kingdom, and maybe he was sort of thinking selfishly. We get people in church today that are like that, right? They're religious,
Oh,
they
yeah.
want all the top positions, but they don't really know Jesus. Like they don't really have that relationship. They're just there for what that position gives to them.
Well, I don't think they're wanting a position. They want the total say in what goes on in the church.
Yeah.
And they bully the people that have those positions to make them do what they want them to do, not what God's telling. I mean, they wouldn't know what God's saying anyway with that
Right.
frame of mind.
So in reality, people in every church has people like that. So in reality, that person's sort of like a Judas, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that it goes on to say that Judas was filled with Satan, and then he was driven to kill himself and everything. But prior to that happening, you know, he really did think that Jesus was going to be something physical, and he wanted a big part of it, and he missed the whole message. And I think those people in our churches that want to have the final say and they want to be the legitimizers of everything, that's what they want too. They want a piece of the pie of as it were.
Yeah. For whatever reason, people feel, especially the ones that give a lot of money to the church,
Uh-huh.
feel that like they deserve a say in how the church functions,
Yeah.
and they go out of their way to try to force everybody to live within that confined thing of how they think it should run.
Yeah. 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 So I mean, yeah, as I was thinking through all this, I wasn't even thinking that direction, but that's a good point. It really is. And I can think of somebody in every single church that was like that.
Yeah, there's always at least one that's like that. Even in the best church, there's always
Yeah.
one person. The question is, does the leadership kowtow to them, or do they just keep their nose to the grind and do what God's telling them to do?
Yeah. There was a church in Coudersport before I pastored the church in Port Allegheny that, I mean, we went there. It wasn't a denomination I normally would go to. But the pastor I really liked, he was the police psychologist for the state police in Pennsylvania, and he sort of preached from. It was like a group therapy every time. So it was very, the way he presented scripture and everything was nice, and the church was growing, and he had actually had me go through and get my certification in that denomination, because when he retired, I was going to take over that church, but I ended up going to Port instead with the Free Methodists, and there was one guy in the church that owned most of the property in Coudersport, and he didn't have any, just like you said, he had zero positions in the church, but he made sure that nothing happened unless he okayed it. Like,
Yeah.
and it was always a conflict. And the pastor felt, as good as he was, he didn't want to step on his toes because he controlled everything in that community.
Yeah.
Now, and when I had talked with the pastor about this specific issue, because this guy really got on my nerve a lot, the pastor's previous church somewhere else, I think it was up in New York, he went up against the Masons, and it just happened to be that town was 99% Masons. And so when he went against the Masons, everybody in that, they protested, it was like this horrible thing.
Yeah.
And he got driven out of the church because he was trying to stand up against Masons, and not realizing 90% of the men in that town were Masons. So he was, because of that, he was trying not to step on this guy. He was trying to work around this guy. But for me, this guy's wife was the piano player, and the music minister, he was like the insurance agent with State Farm. And I played percussion. I did the djembe, and I had different sizes. I wasn't even necessarily anything other than a percussionist. And for the longest time, and I enjoyed that. I had fun doing that. That was a really nice, just sort of lose myself in worship. I guess I needed that at that time. But one day they asked me to fill in and play the piano. And so I did the piano, and of course I'm a keyboardist, so I'm playing it that way. And I was able to be me, and they loved it. And I went through a series of several weeks I did specials, and they had, it was a time in that church where, well, the music was going, not because I was participating, but I think while I was doing music on the piano, a lot of the guitar players and everybody, they sort of really congealed around the flow that I was going. And the worship leader was like, Dan, you do it your way. And he led the singing, but he sort of let me lead the instrumental. And the two of us together, it was like when we did music, people were coming down. One song we had a Michael W. Smith song, and the whole congregation was at the altar during the song, not even before the preaching goes. And this guy complained to the deacons. He's there like, you know what? I didn't come here for 2 sermons. And the music wasn't a sermon, but it was a message.
Yeah.
And his complaint was, you need to fire him because we're not supposed to hear 2 sermons on Sunday. Like, he was angry that everybody was at the altar that Sunday.
How is everybody at the altar a sermon?
Exactly.
They're just being prayed for.
So he felt convicted, and he's there. And really what he was saying is, I can't feel convicted twice in one day. That's just too much for me.
Yeah. Doesn't realize that if he would just let God do his work on him, that he wouldn't have to feel that way.
That's right. Yeah. So he was just this big thorn the whole time I was there, because he would catch me before service and he'd yell at me. And my wife's the piano player, and how dare you steal that position from me? And I said, I didn't steal anything from anybody. I was asked to play. I played. When I'm asked to play the drums, I play the drums. I just do whatever I'm asked.
Yeah. I don't think I have that worry about being asked to play an instrument.
Well, not at your current church, but you are playing in the orchestra and
I am.
all that
It's
stuff.
a lot of fun. So
there you go. All right. That's just day number 1, Monday. We got a whole week to go. See, I was worried we wouldn't have enough to talk about. Anyway.
There's always enough to talk about.
All right. So if you're watching this and you want to look at what occurs each day, later, at some point later, maybe tomorrow, I'm going to input in the note section or the description section Monday, and then I'm going to give scriptures. And then I'll say Tuesday, and I'll give the scriptures. And Wednesday, I'll give the scriptures. So if you're watching this at a later point and you want to know where in the scriptures to see what we're talking about, I'll actually give all the scriptures in the description either tonight or tomorrow. But like on Monday, it's Matthew 21, 1 through 11, Mark's 11, 1 through 11, Luke is 19, 29 through 44, John is 12, 12 through 19. That's what I read. So I have some of the scriptures here. Some of it we're just going to talk about. But afterwards, I'm going to list every scripture for every day. And so you'll get an idea of where you can go to look at this. Like my brother said, most churches don't go through any of these things. Every church will say they have a Passion Week, and it usually is a Good Friday service, maybe the Wednesday service that they give. They talk about some of the events, and then they have a Easter egg hunt on Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and then they do a sunrise service, and then a breakfast. That's usually a church. Some of the more high churches, Lutheran and those churches and stuff, will have like midnight masses or whatever Saturday before, because the idea that the church goes dark and then the candles come on, and that's the resurrection. That's sort of nice. High church is not for everybody, but you can go to a more formal church, and that Saturday evening thing, a lot of them, they all do. I like the sort of I do like the candle thing where it gets really dark, like signifying he died, and then the candles come on, and then the lights come on, and it's resurrection. Yeah. Sort of nice. But it gets tiresome being up after midnight and then turn around and being back at church in the morning for a sunrise service at 7. Anyway, so Tuesday, there's many things that occurred on Tuesday, but this was, everybody's familiar with Jesus cursing the fig tree. He goes into town and he curses the fig tree, and then on the way out of town, they see the fig tree had already died, sort of signifying that Israel had rejected Jesus. That's really the focus of the fig tree. He curses it going in, and on the way back, it's dead. But while he's in Jerusalem on Tuesday, he cleanses the temple. Now, Brian's going to talk about this one. But the only input I'm going to say is that people, for the most part, always try to, in a lot of movies about Jesus, they try to picture Jesus as meek and weak and not strong. But that's not the case when he cleanses the temple. So what happened there?
Well, he went in and saw all the money changers doing business in the temple. And that's supposed to be sacred. So he got really bent out of shape, and he started flipping the tables over and chasing everybody out. And that was really unusual for the character that they're used to seeing. And that was because, that angered him, and, God was angered because they were doing it in the a sanctified area that they shouldn't have been.
Yeah. And so I like to go back to 2 Chronicles 5, because 2 Chronicles 5 is when Solomon, who built the temple, the first temple, when he dedicated the temple to God, and when God's presence first came into the temple, everybody should read it. I'm going to add this if I remember it. 2 Chronicles 5, read about the dedication of the temple, because what occurred was, once they built it, and they have the Holy of Holies, they have the outer courts, and then you have the inner courts, and then you have the Holy of Holies. And the Holy of Holies is where the Ark of the Covenant, yeah. And that's where the presence of God stays on earth. And Solomon has all of the priests that were musicians, both orchestra and choir. They said 500 in the choir, 800 in the orchestra, and they had them go 2 by 2 into every area. I don't mean to scratch my nose, but it itches. I'm sorry. Every area of the temple, even into the gutters and the sewers, and then they start playing music. And people wonder, well, you don't need music to have worship. And I get that. You should be able to worship God without music. And the music, people just come to listen to great music. Well, if people come to church just to listen to good music, then they're coming for the wrong reason. But you don't, right?
Well, it's surprising. Well, I have that exact issue where I'm at, where they got a group of people that play worship, and they do a good job with what they do, but it's more of a emphasis on performance, not on doing this in the spirit for God.
Okay, and that's true. So you can have two churches that look similar. Maybe both may have good preachers, and they both have similar music, and the musicianship is the same, and they're both doing a great job. But one will seem very intimate with God, and one will seem like you just went to a show.
Yeah.
And it all has to do with the spirit of the players, the people that are playing. Are they truly worshiping themselves so that they can in turn allow the church to worship with them?
Well, some of them are, but
Just not the leader.
yeah, the head of the worship is
Which he's the one, and the head of the worship is the one that should be causing the other ones to worship with him. It's his job to make sure that they worship, so that the
well,
and
he
the
tries, but that's something that you can't force.
you can't
You're,
force it.
no, you're either worshiping God or you're not.
Exactly. So, but a lot of people that don't participate in what's called low church, people that are in high churches or other denominations that are very high, will condemn evangelical Christianity that's a low church, which consider low church because it's praise and worship. High, and I'll say this, they both have biblical references. High church, that very formal format, is based on Isaiah chapter 6, which Isaiah is in heaven. That's where the angel puts the coal on his lips, and that's where Isaiah says, Jesus says, who will go? And Isaiah says, send me. So it's a great passage, and that is more the format. There's 6 elements in that. So a very formal worship goes through 6 elements, but it's really hard to stay on task, I believe, with that. Now, a very informal, or what's called concert venue sometimes, that's based on Psalms 93 and 95. There's 3 elements. You have worship, you have praise, you have intimacy. So, and that's the format that's more familiar with us. And yes, you can do it for all the wrong reasons, like in your church, that the leader's not connecting, so the people don't connect. But a lot of times people on the outside see that as every church that has contemporary music is that. They're like, well, it's just a show. It's not really. And they miss the whole point that music ushers in the presence of God. And the example in scripture is 2 Chronicles 5. Solomon sent all the musicians out and they're all playing music. And as the music is playing, then Solomon is leading, he's not preaching, he's leading the people of Jerusalem into prayer. So now you have music playing, and as the music is playing and the people are singing, Solomon is praying, and now all the people are praying. Solomon falls to the ground, overwhelmed with the presence of God. All the people of Israel fall to the ground because they're overwhelmed. And then the Shekinah glory, a cloud that's God, comes into the temple.
Well, that's what they should be, in worship. It should lead to a point where everybody's overwhelmed with the presence of the Spirit.
Yes.
And I've been in some worship services, not at this church, that it went even further, and you could hear the windows of heaven opening up and the choirs of angels singing along with us, because we only had 50 people that were singing, and it sounded like it had over 5,000 people singing.
Yeah.
It was wild.
Well, even when I was leading worship First Baptist, when I was able to do what I wanted to do, in the times where I had the team in sync, and we got to where we were praying before and after everything, and we had a window of time where it was like that. You saw people that, for the most part, were pretty dead because you'd been there before, and hands were lifted and they're praising God, and there's tears and people at the altar. And so when people say that worship music can't facilitate the presence of God, they haven't read the Bible.
That's right. And God says that everything should be praising him.
Everything should be praising him. As a matter of fact, Jesus said, if you don't praise me, then I will cause the rocks to, it wasn't Jesus, but
yeah. I think you froze up.
Can you see me?
I can see you now.
You hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So God said, if you don't praise me, I'll cause the rocks to praise out and praise me. So God's going to get praised no matter what. But in 2 Chronicles, we see that music helped facilitate the presence of God showing up. And so that is the example that we have with worship music. Now, but not only was there music in the temple that brought in the presence of God in Second Chronicles 5, but you also have, they prayed. So you have prayer and you have music and singing. And so, yes, in church, when people say all we need is the preaching, no, the everything that occurs is worship. The preaching is part of worship, but also the prayer, the music, the singing,
Yeah.
all of that facilitates the presence of God coming in. When I was a music minister in White Settlement, Texas, I had one of the deacons who loved music and he loved the worship that we did. When we got done doing the music, he left and went home. And I didn't realize it, but the pastor is Charles Levine, and he said, "Dan, let's go visit." I forget the guy's name. He said, "Let's go visit him because he always leaves after the music." He thought his insinuation was he hated the music and therefore he's leaving, because I think Charles was more formal and this is the 90s and I'm transferring from hymns to worship band.
Yeah.
So I think he was trying to blame me for this guy leaving. And we go visit him and we're like, "Why do you leave?" He says, the worship music is a bigger message to me than the sermon is. He says, "Honestly, I fall asleep during the sermon. But when we sing and we worship together, I have met God. And when the worship is done, I leave. I've had church already."
Well, it should be that way because they say that the musicians, the Levitical priests, were the ones that carried around the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, yeah.
So they ushered the Spirit of God around. Well,
that's true.
And the same way with the worship band. The worship band is the modern day Levitical priest that ushers in the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
Into the to the church service so that people can enjoy spending time with the Spirit.
Right. And no, and that reminds me too, when they were Josh was fighting the Battle of Jericho, ahead of the army was the Levitical priests with the musicians.
Yeah.
The musicians went in front of the army.
That's right, because they were carrying the Ark of the Covenant. So they were carrying around the very presence of God. And I think people should look at the worship team as they're carrying the very presence of God into the service when they start
Right.
worship. That's why worship's at the start of the service. It's because you're ushering in God's Spirit.
Yes, yeah, and that's yeah. So at the beginning of the service, we do this to follow the pattern of how Israel used the musicians to have God's presence go in front of them, how Solomon had the music and the prayer and the singing to usher in the presence of God. That is the example of 2 Corinthians 5 that we use to usher in the presence of God in the service. And so when you have a church that in no way they don't put any value on that's a tragedy. Even in churches evangelical churches that have nice music, sometimes the pastor isn't really pro the music and doesn't sing, doesn't participate, doesn't raise his hand and sing. He's studying the whole time, worships, he's sitting down doing this.
Yeah.
And then those churches, when I see that, I don't care how good the church is, I'll get up and I want to leave. I don't even want to be there because I don't want to hear what you have to say. If you're not participating in corporate worship, I don't care about what you have to say. I mean, there was people like that at First Baptist too. So anyway, moving right along. So as we go back, then, Jesus cleansed the temple. Second Chronicles chapter 5, we see an image of it being a very holy place. That's where the presence of God was. Jesus says, you have made what is supposed to be a house of prayer into a den of vipers.
Yeah.
And boy, Jesus was like Rambo that day. He wasn't, they always picture him as weak, but not that day. He wasn't weak. He was like
Well,
Rambo.
his general build would have been, he would have been built with muscles, not this thin little weak thing that we see all the time. Because
Yeah.
his job was to be a carpenter. And back then, the tools weren't powered, they were only powered by your muscle power.
Yeah.
And that was tough work, and it built muscles up on you. So there's no way he was this weak little thing that people try to make him out to be.
Oh, okay. You keep talking. My doorbell did ring that time.
All right. Okay. So I think that Jesus would look like someone that, if you were to go to the gym and you see a guy that typically goes to the gym 3 times a week and he works out, that he would have that general build. Now, he wouldn't go around and dress so that you could recognize that. And a lot of times I do work out, but I wouldn't go and so
Yeah,
was
I
your
forgot.
doorbell?
Yeah, it was the door. I forgot to. I was going to text Ron and doing lunch today instead of tomorrow, and I forgot to tell him 12 instead of 11. But
Yeah.
then I thought, well, we'll be done by 11:30, but we're only partway through. So,
Well, he I guess he had reddish hair.
well, that I don't know about because I've heard people say that, but my feeling is because he was Jewish, red hair was not common with Jews.
No, but there
They
are
were
Jews that have
olive
red
skin
hair.
with black hair, huh?
There are Jews that have red hair.
No, they do. But Jews that are the well, I forget what they call them now, but the Jews that have never left the Middle East are
Yeah.
usually black hair. So I've heard the red hair. I don't know that I've heard it. I don't know that I would go with that, but I've heard it.
I've heard that my whole life.
All right.
I
Oh,
don't think it matters.
all the
Red hair.
ticking stopped.
Yeah.
Do you hear the ticking now?
I've never heard the ticking on my end.
I thought it was the mic cable, but it just started happening again. All right. Well, we're going to move on. Wednesday. Look, I got Wednesday at the top now.
The little girl that goes around Adam's family. Wednesday.
There you go. So on Wednesday, they leave they leave Jerusalem. Jesus you have of course, the temple controversies where Jesus is talking very sternly with Pharisees in the temple courtyard and stuff like that. And then you have, of course, Jesus take the disciples on the Mount of Olives overlooking Jerusalem. And that's where he goes through Matthew 24:25, which is the Olivet Discourse, where he's talking about the parables that are trying to prepare the disciples for the fact that Jesus is going to die and go, and that he's going to return. One of which would be like the 10 bridesmaids. 5, they all had oil, but 5 had enough oil and 5 didn't. And the 5 that didn't had to leave at some point to go buy more oil. And while they're gone, the groom comes. The groom comes and takes the 5 that are prepared to the wedding feast, and the 5 that come back, they missed. They were left behind. Sort of, to me, which clearly shows the rapture, God taking the church out, and people just not everybody's prepared for that. They're not ready for that to occur. So,
Yeah, their jaw hits the ground when they realize that the rapture happened and they're still here.
right? Yeah, I got the ticking to stop. I think it's the mic cable, but whatever. Yeah, exactly. So he gives all of these parables. And if you're running where that's found, that's Matthew 24:25. It's referred to theologically as the Olivet Discourse. These are all the parables that Jesus tells overlooking the city about the fact that he's leaving and he's coming back. So if you want to look at what Jesus says about the return of Christ, Matthew 24:25. All right, so we're going to move on to Thursday, which is the Passover meal. Now, when we do communion, we do, we have the bread or cracker and we have wine or juice. Is that all that the Passover meal was?
Well, I think they had a regular meal, but this was Jesus trying to communicate to him that this was symbolic for him giving his life for everybody's sins.
Yeah. So at a certain point, he's isolating those elements to say, this is what I want you to continue to do, to remember, so you don't forget the sacrifice that I made for until I return. But they did the Passover meal. So this is during Passover. And this is a significant because it helps us to understand, because some people say later that Jesus died on a Thursday versus a Friday. We know it wasn't Thursday because Thursday is the Passover meal. It's called the Seder meal. It's called the Passover meal. And it was a full meal. If you go back to Exodus, this was the meal that they ate before they took off and went crossed the Red Sea. So they had to move quickly. And in Exodus, you see that the blood was on the doorstep. So the lamb's blood on the doorstep kept the death angel from coming into their house. So they were saved. Their family was saved because of the blood of the lamb on the doorstep. It wasn't necessarily saved because of the food they ate, but the food represented that hardship they're getting ready to go through. But that had bitter herbs and salads and fish, and it had, it probably didn't have fish, but it had lamb. They ate lamb. So it was a full meal. And so this Passover meal that Jesus was eating with the disciples in the upper room was the full meal. They ate lamb and they had the salads and the bitter herbs. And in 70 AD, I went to a Seder meal, a Passover meal at my Bible college up in North Carolina. And the guy that led it, he was from Israel. He was a Jew from Israel that got saved. And so he was Messianic Jew, but he was going through the Bible college, and he was wanting to introduce Jesus to his whole family that were non-believing Jews. And so he had this big Passover meal during Easter at the cafeteria at the college. And I went, and I was so glad that I did. And one of the things that happens during that meal is at the beginning, they take the matzah bread and they break it. Now, this custom started in 70 AD. So it started, and by 70 AD, most of the Jews in Jerusalem were believers in Jesus. So, the whole thing of the Passover meal changed. Even if you go to a Hasidic Jew today that doesn't believe in Jesus, they still do this. They just don't know why they do it, but they know it started in 70 AD. But what it is, they break the bread, which represents Jesus' body breaking. Then they hide the bread, and then they go through the whole meal. And at the end, the kids go running around looking for the matzah that's broken. And when they find it, everybody celebrates. That represents the resurrection. They don't know why they do it, but they do it. So they're actually they're actually celebrating Jesus' death and resurrection, even though they don't even know he came yet. Yeah. And but during, and that of course didn't start until 70 AD. So that started after Jesus, but during Jesus' time, at that point where they're talking about the different foods and the meanings, when he picked up the bread, he changed the meaning of the bread to be his broken body, and he changed the meaning of the wine to be his blood that was going to be sacrificed. And that's something that future, it hadn't happened yet. Jesus hadn't died yet, so he's given them this remembrance to do. And so that's happening then. But at this meal, he says, one of you will become a traitor to me. Well, I forget the exact words. I can't think of it, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And they're like, who is it? Is it me? Is it me? Is it me? And Jesus says, somebody who breaks this bread with me. And then he dips the bread and he gives the bread to Judas. And I would think that people there would realize, oh, Judas is the traitor, but they didn't realize it, that it didn't occur. And that's when Judas leaves and he takes the silver to expose Jesus.
Yeah. And it's sad what happened to him, but he did it to himself.
Right? No, yeah, he did it to himself. And of course, he doesn't repent. He ends up killing himself later. There's two different accounts. I don't think that there's a conflict. I think both happened. It's just two people are telling two different sides of what happened. And I think those are both very well merged behind, because one says he hung, the other one said he fell and his body broke open. I think he hung himself and then the rope broke, and then so I think it all happened.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you have that going on. And then Jesus goes and prays at the garden. And while he's praying, it says that he was under so much anguish that he sweat blood drops. Well, I used to, when I researched this, when I did a sermon series on this, when I was preaching, that medically there is a condition where you're so stressed that the capillaries under your skin burst.
Yeah, and you start sweating blood.
Yeah, and like the Jews that were being killed in Auschwitz and stuff in World War II, they were saying that was happening to them too. So when people are under great distress, that just shows you just how much anguish he had about that decision to go through what he went through.
Yeah, because he wasn't just dying. He was paying the price for all the sin in the world. Which,
right?
For us, it's hard to imagine what kind of stress that would give you, because we'd never be in a position to stand in for all the sin in the world.
Right. So that sort of ends it with Thursday. Now in the middle of the night on Thursday, of course, he gets arrested. And I like that. If you read that account, I don't have it up right now, but when they arrest him, you always see in the movies like 5 or 10 soldiers, but I think, based on what it's saying, it's probably closer to 1,000 soldiers that came to arrest him. And when they said, we're looking for Jesus. And he says, when he says, I am, it just says they were thrown back. Like in the movies, they just like go like this. But when you look at the Greek, what it really implies is they were like the power of the word of his mouth under all that anguish. When he said that I am he, that it just doesn't imply they moved back, but it implies like they were thrown 20 feet through the air. So It's like a bowling, like I described to Dory yesterday, it's like a bowling ball hitting down pins. That's what it was. And so when you see that they got up and they were because it says they were put back, and then there was a lot of commotion, and Peter cuts off the ear, and if there's only 5 people and all they do is go, I don't really see how there's going to be great commotion. But if he says I am, and it just power comes out and everybody goes flying, I would think they're like really scared.
I would think so, yeah.
And that would cause them to be very disorganized and explain why Peter's trying to fight with them. And then Jesus has to heal the guy's ear that he cuts off, and they arrest him anyway. And he goes through all of those trials, which leads us to Friday. Now, I know we spent a lot of time, if you're watching, on things that occurred on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The reason we did this is because a lot of times churches don't spend enough time on that. They talk, everybody's heard Resurrection Friday. They've heard Resurrection Sunday over and over again. They've heard Good Friday over and over again. We know the events of Friday to Sunday, but nobody talks about this other stuff, right? So that's why we've spent a lot of time on this.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna sort of quickly go through the end of the story, because everybody knows the end of the story type thing. So I'm going to read a couple verses in Matthew on the preparation for the crucifixion, and then a couple on the actual observation of the crucifixion, and then we'll talk about the resurrection, and then we'll be done. Okay, so I was already there. I went past it. 26. 26:17 to 18. Now on the first day of Matzah, the disciples came to Jesus saying, where do you want us to prepare for you eat the Passover? I guess this is the preparation. This is actually the Passover meal. So we've already talked about that. I guess I misrepresented that one, but. And you got the betrayal. Peter denies. So let's do a few things. I guess the scripture that I wrote down is really for Thursday, not for Friday. So Then you have the trial beginning. And of course, it goes back and forth between Pilate or the King Herod, and stuff like that. And you have Peter denying Jesus 3 times. Now he has remorse like Judas did, but he also repented. And then of course Pilate, he didn't really want to kill Jesus. He didn't see anything harm in there, and he wanted to release him. And the crowd was like, "Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him!" And so he reluctantly does that. But then when they scourge him and they whip him, and we know all these things, they separate his clothes and all of these things. I was going to read the account, and really, I guess I pulled up the wrong account. But anyway, so Jesus lays down. I'm going to start in Matthew 27, verse 45. Matthew, it says, "Now from the 6th hour, darkness fell upon the land until the 9th hour." So from 12 o'clock, because they go from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., or 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. is the day. Or 6 p.m. starts the new day type thing. So this is at 12 o'clock until 3 o'clock. And it says, about the 9th hour, Jesus cries out with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lemna sabachthani." That is, my God, why have you abandoned me?" When some of those standing heard it, they began saying, "This man is calling for Elijah." Right away, they ran and took a sponge and filled it with sour wine and put it to his lips. So you got this. They think it's Elijah. But eventually, Jesus cries out with a loud voice, "It is finished," and he gives up his spirit. Now, and then that takes us to he dies. They take him down. Anything happen on Saturday?
He was put in the tomb.
He's in the tomb. The disciples are all scattered. They're hiding, because usually in this time period, when they killed a leader of a movement, they also killed all the followers. So they're all hiding. And then early in the morning on Sunday, now after the Sabbath, Saturday, so we know this is Sunday, as it began to dawn, the first day of the week, Mary of Magdalene and the other Marys came to look at the tomb, and suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of Adonai descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing was white as snow, and those keeping watch were shaken in the fear and became like dead men. But the angel answered and said unto the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen." And that's the difference between Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad.
And all those.
Because when they died, they're still dead. And he's the only one that came back.
That's right.
So I know we sort of quickly went through the ending of it, but the Friday to Sunday we hear every Easter, and we felt like maybe we wanted to give a little extra time for people to be able to experience everything that's occurring, so that people can experience what happened on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. He's in the grave. It says that he actually went down into Abraham's bosom to get those that are there to take him up to heaven.
Yeah.
Is what happened. But he's in the grave. The Passover meal on Thursday, being crucified on Friday. They had counted the actual crucifixion. Matthew 26 sort of starts the Passover, and all the trials. Matthew 27 goes into finishing up the trials in the actual crucifixion, and then finally the resurrection in that. So that covers Passion Week. Any last words?
I just wish more people would, especially in church, would pay attention to what he went through.
Yeah.
Because, there's only one person that could have done that, him. None of us would have been able to do that.
No, only
9 tails, getting that, it's ripping your flesh off. and stuff when
Mhm.
they're
Mhm.
whipping you with it. It's like,
Yep. Yeah, if you haven't seen Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, you should, because even though it still doesn't give it justice, it gives you a little taste of what that was like
yeah,
and what he went through. You know, for people to really understand that. So, yeah, and they just don't. I mean, and sometimes this is the only time of year people go to church, but they still miss out on everything that occurred leading up to it and all the significance. There's a lot to pack. So what we're going to do is we're going to list each day on the description later. We're going to give you all the verses that you can read, so you can actually go through the from now until Sunday to read what happens every day, and you can be more educated on everything. So
all right.
I think that's it. That's all I got, unless you want to add something.
No, that's good.
All right. So we will see everybody next week. Maybe Thursday will be our permanent day. I'm not sure, but we're going to be back and talk about Titus. So we're going to start with Titus next week. I'll see you
Okay.
then.